In Nairobi, a sacred promise was broken, and someone began collecting souls. If you're ready for crime, culture, and chilling truths, like, subscribe, and step into Tales and Shadow Chronicles. Nairobi glittered like a lie the night Daniel Mwangi died. From the street below, his tower in Westlands shimmered with imported confidence, mirrored glass reflecting billboards, chrome ambition. The city moved as it always did. Bodas weaving recklessly through traffic, rooftop bars pulsing with Afrobeats, politicians laughing too loudly behind guarded gates. But on the 23rd floor, the air had gone still. Detective Kamau Njoroge felt it before he saw the body, that unnatural stillness that clung to certain death scenes like invisible smoke. Daniel Mwangi lay on his back across a Persian rug, silk shirt wrinkled, expensive cufflinks glinting beneath recessed lighting. His eyes were open. Not just open, stretched wide in a final moment of recognition. There were no wounds, no bruises, no sign of poison. The smart lock on his door showed no tampering. Security cameras in the hallway captured no visitor, yet something had been in this room with him. Kamau stepped carefully across polished marble, listening to the low hum of central air and the faint electrical buzz of a city that refused to sleep. The scent of sandalwood incense lingered in the air, almost deliberate. Mwangi's right hand was clenched into a fist. The pathologist, Dr. Nyambura, glanced up at Kamau as he approached. "Cardiac arrest," she said cautiously. But his heart was healthy. Kamau knelt slowly. Between Mwangi's rigid fingers was a small carved wooden bead, dark, worn smooth, marked with symbols etched so shallow they seemed to breathe rather than exist. Kamau did not touch it immediately. He stared at it, feeling something tighten in his chest, not fear exactly, but recognition without permission. The bead did not belong in a room like this. It belonged in dust, in smoke, in land that remembered footsteps. Mwangi had built half of modern Nairobi's skyline, glass towers rising boldly against the distant silhouette of Ngong Hills. He was celebrated as a visionary developer, a philanthropist, a donor to campaigns no one admitted publicly. But Kamau knew what glass towers often hid: disputes, evictions, signatures pressed onto paper by men who had never learned to read English contracts. "Who found him?" Kamau asked. "Housekeeper," Amina replied quietly. Door was locked from inside. She used the emergency override. Kamau finally pried the bead from Mwangi's hand and slipped it into an evidence bag. It felt warmer than it should have. Outside the window, lightning flickered faintly beyond the hills, though no thunder followed. Kamau walked to the glass and stared down at the river of headlights flowing below. Somewhere beneath that glow lay the old soil of the city, soil that had once been sacred ground long before steel foundations pierced it. Mwangi's eyes still seemed to be looking at something over Kamau's shoulder, something that had stood close enough to be recognized, something that had not needed to force entry. The bead did not leave Kamau's mind. By morning, political pressure had already begun tightening around the case like invisible wire. Daniel Mwangi was not just a developer, he was a financial artery. Senators called the Inspector General before breakfast. News stations ran segments questioning police competence. By noon, Kamau was instructed to treat the death as natural causes pending confirmation. That phrase irritated him. There had been nothing natural about the fear frozen in Mwangi's face. In the forensic lab, the bead sat isolated in a sterile tray beneath fluorescent lights that made it look smaller, almost harmless. But the markings carved into its surface told another story. Amina leaned against the counter, arms folded. "It's Kikuyu," she said softly. Kamau did not answer. He already knew. He had seen carvings like that once, long ago, during a village gathering when he was 12. His father had gripped his shoulder tightly as elders stood in a circle beneath a fig tree. An oath had been sworn that day, one involving land, inheritance, and betrayal. Kamau had not understood it then. He only remembered the way the wind had stopped as the words were spoken. "I ran Mwangi's background," Amina continued. 10 years ago he attended a land arbitration council near Ngong. There was resistance against one of his housing projects. Kamau felt something shift inside him. Ngong, the hills where the city's noise faded into wind and open sky. The place where stories older than Nairobi still breathed beneath grass. By evening, Kamau and Amina were driving toward the outskirts, where paved roads gave way to red earth and scattered homesteads. The skyline of Nairobi receded behind them, replaced by open fields stretching toward the shadowed slopes of Ngong Hills. They arrived at a modest compound where elders once convened during land disputes. The air smelled of wood smoke and damp soil. An old man named Mzee Baraka received them without surprise, as though he had been expecting visitors since Mwangi's final breath. His eyes were milky with age but disturbingly sharp. "You have brought something that does not belong to the city," he said before Kamau could introduce himself. Kamau stiffened. He had left the bead in an evidence locker, yet the old man spoke with certainty. "An oath was taken here," Mzee Baraka continued, voice low and steady. "A blood oath to protect ancestral land from those who would sell it piece by piece. Amina exchanged a glance with Kamau. Did Mwangi take that oath? She asked. The elder's silence stretched long enough to become an answer. Finally he nodded, and he broke it. Wind swept down from the hills, carrying dust across the compound. Kamau felt the weight of something invisible pressing closer. Oaths, he said carefully, are not enforceable by law. Mzee Baraka's gaze hardened. Some laws were here before yours. And as darkness settled over the hills, Kamau began to understand that this case would not remain confined to glass towers and forensic reports. It would reach backward, into memory, into soil, into promises made where the earth itself had been witness. Good, we descend deeper now. The hills will begin to feel alive. Politics will tighten. And death will stop looking like coincidence. Morning came reluctantly over the slopes of Ngong Hills, dragging a pale grey light across the grasslands like something half awake and unwilling. Kamau had not slept. He stood outside the elders' compound long before Amina emerged from the vehicle, the chill air biting through his jacket. In the distance, the skyline of Nairobi shimmered faintly beneath early haze, glass and ambition rising from land that once belonged to grazing cattle and quiet shrines. It unsettled him how close the two worlds were. Mzee Baraka's words from the previous night echoed with quiet persistence. Some laws were here before yours. Kamau had built his career on evidence, on timelines, on motive and means, but this case resisted those familiar shapes. The oath the elder described had not been symbolic. It had been sealed with blood, soil and invocation. 10 men had sworn never to sell ancestral land to developers without collective consent. Mwangi had sworn publicly, hand pressed to the earth. 3 years later he acquired that same land through proxy companies. The transaction had been legal, documented, taxed, approved by the county government, but legality did not erase the oath, and now he was dead in a locked apartment with a sacred bead clenched in his fist. Kamau felt a flicker of anger, not at the elder, not even at Mwangi, but at the suggestion that something invisible could operate outside the system he had sworn to defend. You believe someone is killing them, Amina said quietly beside him. I believe someone wants us to think that, Kamau replied, yet even as he spoke, he was unsure which possibility disturbed him more. They returned to the station before noon, only to find tension waiting like a coiled snake. The Deputy Inspector General summoned Kamau immediately. The office air smelled of coffee and restrained impatience. A framed photograph of the governor hung conspicuously behind the desk. This case is attracting unnecessary speculation, the deputy said, fingers steepled. We are treating Mwangi's death as cardiac failure unless concrete evidence suggests otherwise. Kamau held his silence. You visited Ngong, the deputy continued. It was not a question. Be careful not to inflame cultural sensitivities. Investors are nervous. Investors. The word lingered longer than it should have. As Kamau left the office, his phone buzzed with a restricted number. He answered without speaking. A man's voice, calm and almost courteous, responded. Detective Njoroge, leave the hills alone. Some foundations crack when disturbed. The line went dead. Kamau stood still in the corridor, pulse steady but thoughts racing. This was no longer just about superstition. Someone with access to police movement logs had known where he went. Someone with influence was watching. That evening, as rain clouds gathered thick and low over Nairobi, Kamau returned to the evidence locker and removed the bead. Under harsh fluorescent light, the carvings seemed deeper than before, spirals intersecting with lines that resembled ancient script. He turned it slowly in his palm. If this was intimidation, it was precise. If it was ritual, it was calculated. And somewhere between those two possibilities lay a truth far more dangerous than either. The second death came before the rain stopped. It happened in Karen, in a gated estate guarded by electric fences and imported security systems. Joseph Karanya, former council member at the Ngong arbitration, was found slumped in his home office, face pressed against mahogany desk, computer screen still glowing with unsigned transfer documents. His wife insisted he had been alone all evening. Security footage showed no intruder, no breach, no malfunction. By the time Kamau arrived, stormwater was still dripping from jacaranda leaves outside, staining the driveway purple. He entered the house with a controlled stillness that masked a growing unease. The room felt wrong, not chaotic, not disturbed, just wrong, as though the air pressure had shifted hours earlier and never corrected itself. Karanya's body showed no trauma, no sign of forced ingestion. The preliminary read again suggested sudden cardiac arrest. Kamau exhaled slowly through his nose. 2 healthy men. 2 broken oaths, 2 impossible scenes. He moved around the desk carefully, and then he saw it, resting near Karanya's open palm, not clutched this time but deliberately placed. Another carved wooden bead. This one was darker, heavier. The markings were more pronounced. Kamau felt something cold move through him, not fear but inevitability. Amina met his eyes from across the room. No words were needed. Outside, thunder rolled low over the distant silhouette of Ngong Hills. Back at the station, Kamau overlaid the timeline of both men's financial records. the pattern sharpened with brutal clarity. Each had quietly transferred land ownership within months of their deaths, land originally protected under the oath. Each transfer ultimately benefited shell corporations linked to the same development consortium. And that consortium traced back, through layers of political insulation, to high-ranking officials who now publicly mourned Mwangi as a visionary patriot. Kamau leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. This was no random vigilante superstition. This was a reckoning intertwined with money and power, whether human hands were carrying it out or merely orchestrating it through fear no longer mattered. Someone was enforcing the oath, not symbolically, but lethally. And if the pattern continued, there were still names left on that original council list. As lightning fractured the Nairobi sky again that night, Kamau realized the investigation had shifted beyond solving 2 deaths. It had become a race, not just against a killer, but against a promise spoken years ago beneath open sky, where witnesses had not been cameras, but the earth itself. By the end of the week, the lab had nothing, and that nothing was louder than any confession. Both Daniel Mwangi and Joseph Karanya had died of what medical reports cautiously labeled acute cardiac arrhythmia, sudden and catastrophic. No toxins, no injected substances, no trace of forced trauma, no abnormal levels of stress hormones that would suggest fear-induced collapse. Their hearts had simply stopped. Kamau stood behind the one-way glass as Dr. Nyambura delivered the findings with visible irritation. Bodies don't betray themselves like this without cause, she muttered. If there was poison, it's something beyond our current panels. Kamau nodded slowly, though his mind was elsewhere. 2 powerful men, both sworn under the same land oath. 2 beads carved from sacred fig wood. 2 sealed environments. The press had begun whispering phrases like ritual justice and ancestral curse, careful not to sound ridiculous while chasing ratings. Meanwhile, investors were quietly pausing funding for the Ngong Ridge development project. Political donors were calling in favors. The city's undercurrent was shifting. Amina approached him later that evening in the evidence room. What if this isn't about poison? She asked quietly. Kamau did not look at her. Then what? She hesitated. What if someone is recreating the oath conditions, psychological triggers, suggestion, fear powerful enough to shock the body? Kamau turned then, meeting her eyes. You're proposing murder through belief. Amina didn't flinch. Belief has killed before. That night, Kamau remained alone in the station long after most officers had gone home. Rain streaked the windows in restless lines. He removed both beads from evidence and placed them side by side under the desk lamp. They were not identical. The carvings differed slightly, almost as though each bead had been marked specifically for the man who received it. Kamau ran a finger along the grooves of the first bead and felt an unwelcome flicker of memory. He saw red soil beneath bare feet. He heard elders chanting low and rhythmic beneath a towering magumo tree. He remembered his father's hand pressing against his shoulder, firm and unyielding. Some promises bind the soul, his father had said that day. Kamau had been a boy, confused and embarrassed by the seriousness of it all. He had left the village years later to study law enforcement in the city, determined to live by codes written in constitutions, not carved into wood. Yet here he was, staring at 2 small objects that had slipped past CCTV cameras and biometric locks as if those systems had never existed. His phone vibrated suddenly. Another restricted number, he answered. Silence breathed on the other end for several seconds before a voice spoke, low and measured. 2 have returned to the earth, 8 remain. The line went dead. Kamau stared at the beads, pulse steady but thoughts spiraling. This was no longer superstition, it was orchestration. And whoever was behind it knew exactly how many names were left. Sleep came heavily that night, dragging Kamau into a dream he had avoided for years. He was 12 again, standing beneath the wide branches of a sacred fig tree as wind circled low across open land near Ngong Hills. The elders stood in a ring, their voices layered and solemn. In the center of the circle lay a shallow calabash filled with soil and a single carved bead. His father, Njoroge Kamau, had been younger then but already worn by struggle. Their family land had nearly been seized by a relative who forged signatures during a migration dispute. That day was not ceremonial, it was desperate. We swear, the elders had spoken together, hands touching the earth. We swear before those who came before and those yet unborn. Kamau remembered the sharp smell of crushed leaves. He remembered his father slicing his thumb lightly and pressing blood into the soil. And then, unexpectedly, he had taken Kamau's small hand and done the same. You will protect what feeds you, his father had whispered, even if the law forgets. Kamau had not understood the weight of those words. He only knew he felt frightened, not of spirits, but of expectation. In the dream, the wind had stopped abruptly. The earth beneath his feet had felt almost warm. He woke before dawn, heart pounding not from fear but from recognition. His father had died 5 years ago, sudden stroke, unresolved debts, unresolved arguments between them. They had not spoken in months before his death. Kamau had accused him of clinging to outdated traditions. His father had accused him of forgetting who he was. Sitting now at his kitchen table, the city still dark beyond the window, Kamau felt something he had refused to admit: guilt. Not for abandoning tradition, but for dismissing it entirely. He reached for his laptop and reopened the archived land arbitration records. 10 men had sworn that oath under Mzee Baraka's guidance. 2 were dead, 8 remained. One name stood out: Councillor Peter Mwangi, now a senior political advisor closely linked to the governor's office. Mwangi had quietly authorized rezoning approvals that accelerated the Ngong Ridge project. And unlike Mwangi or Karanya, Mwangi had not yet transferred his own portion of protected land, which meant if the pattern held, he would soon. Kamau leaned back slowly, the dawn light creeping across his apartment walls. This was no random cleansing of traitors. It was strategic. Each death sent a message. Each bead was a signature. And somewhere between ancestral oath and modern corruption, someone was deciding who returned to the earth next. For the first time since the investigation began, Kamau felt something shift inside him. Not belief, not surrender, but an unsettling awareness that this case was no longer only professional. It was personal. The original arbitration council had dissolved quietly 3 years after the oath was sworn, its records archived under routine land dispute filings. But when Kamau began cross-referencing the 10 men's financial histories, silence revealed its own pattern. One by one, through intermediaries and shell companies, most of them had profited from rezoning approvals that converted ancestral grazing land into private estates. None had sold directly. They had been careful. They had leased mineral rights, granted infrastructure easements, accepted community development grants. On paper it was clean, but money had flowed, quietly, strategically, and always in ways that benefited the same development consortium tied to Daniel Mwangi's empire. Kamau sat in the dim glow of his office, files spread like a map of quiet betrayal. Outside, Nairobi pulsed with traffic and distant music, indifferent to the slow unearthing of its buried compromises. Amina stood near the board, reading the list of remaining oath members. 6 left, she said softly, assuming the caller wasn't exaggerating. Kamau nodded. The anonymous voice had said 8 remained before Karanya's death. Now it would be 6. They're being marked in sequence, Amina continued. Almost ritualistically, Kamau tapped a pen against the table. Or symbolically, fear spreads faster than bullets. But fear alone did not carve beads from sacred fig wood. Fear did not bypass biometric security systems. Kamau decided to confront the remaining oath members directly. The first 2 he visited denied everything. Denied the oath had been binding, denied personal gain, denied fear. Yet Kamau noticed the small details, the tightened jaw when Ngong was mentioned, the glance toward windows as if expecting something unseen. One man, Samuel Githui, broke first. We were cornered, he said hoarsely. The governor's office made it clear. Development would happen with or without us. The oath, it was symbolic. Symbolic to whom? Kamau asked. Githui had no answer. That evening, as Kamau drove back toward the city, storm clouds gathered again over Ngong Hills. He realized something unsettling. The killer, if there was one, was not rushing. The deaths were spaced carefully, allowing anxiety to ferment among the remaining men. This was not random vengeance. It was psychological siege. And silence, the silence of the council, the silence of political offices, the silence between oath and betrayal, had become its most powerful weapon. By the following week, the case was no longer confined to homicide. It had become political. Investors from overseas demanded reassurance. Editorials accused the police of fueling superstition by entertaining ritual conspiracy theories. The governor publicly dismissed the speculation as dangerous cultural sensationalism. Privately, Kamau was summoned again. This time the tone was sharper. You are creating instability, the deputy inspector general said flatly. There is no evidence of homicide. Kamau remained standing. 2 healthy men don't die days apart after land transfers without connection. The deputy's eyes narrowed. And what are you suggesting, that the earth itself is issuing warrants? The sarcasm was deliberate. Kamau didn't respond. He understood the unspoken truth. The Ngong Ridge development project was worth billions. Delays meant losses. Losses meant political consequences. After the meeting, Amina caught up with him in the corridor. They're going to sideline you, she warned. Kamau's jaw tightened. Then we move faster. That night, Kamau received another restricted call. This time the voice sounded closer, not distorted, not masked. You protect men who stole from the soil, it said calmly. Why? Kamau felt anger flare. If you're delivering justice, come forward. A soft chuckle followed. Justice is not performed for applause. The line disconnected. Kamau stood alone in his apartment, city lights flickering through the window. He replayed the conversation in his mind. The speaker did not sound unhinged. He sounded convinced, certain, as though carrying out something inevitable rather than criminal. Kamau poured himself water, hands steady. If this was a vigilante network, it was disciplined. If it was a single orchestrator, he was meticulous. And if it was neither, if belief itself was being weaponized, then the battlefield was psychological, not physical. As distant thunder rolled again over Ngong Hills, Kamau realized the investigation had shifted from solving deaths to preventing the next one, and the next name on the list was growing impatient. Wanjiru Ndigwa lived in a modest homestead on the edge of Ngong, where the land still breathed openly and fences were more symbolic than secure. She had been the only woman present during the original oath, a widow who inherited grazing land after her husband's death. Unlike the others, she had refused every development offer outright. When Kamau arrived, she did not pretend surprise. "They're afraid now," she said before he spoke. The men who laughed at the oath. Kamau studied her carefully. There was no hysteria in her voice, only quiet certainty. "Do you believe the deaths are punishment?" he asked. She met his gaze without hesitation. "I believe promises matter." The wind shifted, carrying dust across the yard. "Did you break yours?" Kamau pressed. She shook her head. "No, that is why I still sleep." The statement unsettled him more than he expected. She was not hiding fear, she simply did not expect harm, as though some unseen ledger recognized compliance. Before leaving, Kamau asked her about the bead. Wanjiru's expression darkened slightly. "Each bead was carved from the same fig tree," she said. "One bead per oath taker. They were buried at the base of the tree after the ceremony." Kamau felt his pulse slow deliberately. "Buried," she nodded. "To return to the earth unless the oath was broken." The implication hung between them. Someone had dug them up, or perhaps they had never stayed buried at all. As Kamau drove back toward Nairobi, the sky seemed heavier than before. Wanjiru's certainty did not feel delusional. It felt grounded. That frightened him. Because grounded belief could mobilize people. It could justify action. It could turn moral outrage into execution. And if someone was acting on behalf of that belief, the next death would not be accidental. It would be deliberate. Councillor Peter M. Warrior died before Kamau could reach him. It happened during a televised charity gala in Upper Hill. Cameras were rolling, donors applauded. M. Warrior stood at the podium mid-speech, praising sustainable development and community empowerment. Then his voice faltered. His hand trembled. For a brief second his expression shifted, not confusion, not pain, but recognition, as though he had just seen a familiar face in the crowd. He collapsed before security could reach him. The broadcast cut abruptly. By the time Kamau arrived at the private hospital where M. Warrior had been rushed, the official declaration had already been signed: cardiac arrest, the third in under 2 weeks. Kamau stood beside the covered body in the morgue, jaw tight. There was something else, a junior nurse whispered nervously. In his jacket pocket. Kamau looked up sharply. She hesitated before handing over a sealed evidence bag. Inside lay another carved bead. This one bore a deeper groove, as if the carving tool had pressed harder. Kamau felt something inside him shift from skepticism to urgency. 3 men, 3 beads, 3 sealed environments, 1 apartment, 1 office, 1 public event with no visible contact. The pattern was no longer subtle. Back at the station, Kamau pinned M. Warrior's photograph beneath the others on the board. 6 faces remained. Amina stood beside him in silence. "They're escalating," she said finally. Kamau nodded. "No," he replied quietly. "They're accelerating." Outside, lightning fractured the sky again over Ngong Hills, illuminating the distant slopes in sharp white flashes before plunging them back into darkness. Kamau stared at the board, feeling the weight of something older than law pressing against modern institutions. This was no longer about superstition, nor solely about corruption. It was about enforcement, cold, patient enforcement of a promise sworn in soil. And whoever was carrying it out had just proven they could strike anywhere. Kamau stopped looking at the deaths as isolated events and began studying them as ritual stages. 3 men, 3 public betrayals, 3 beads returned. When he laid their timelines side by side, the precision disturbed him more than the deaths themselves. Each man had authorized a final transfer or approval within 48 hours before collapsing. Not months, not weeks, days. It was as though the oath had an invisible trigger, a line that, once crossed, activated consequence. Kamau stood before the evidence board in the dim operations room, connecting red string not between men but between moments, signature dates, transfer receipts, rezoning approvals. The remaining 6 oath members had not yet finalized their pending negotiations, but 5 of them had meetings scheduled within the next 2 weeks. Coincidence no longer felt plausible. Someone had access to confidential land registry updates. Someone knew exactly when each man completed his betrayal. Amina entered quietly, holding a printout. "I traced the wood composition," she said. "All 3 beads were carved from the same tree, a sacred magumo near Ngong." Kamau looked up slowly. "The same tree where the oath was sworn," she nodded. "And here's the problem. That tree was struck by lightning and burned 2 years ago." The room fell silent except for the distant hum of city traffic beyond the station walls of Nairobi. Kamau felt the air shift inside him, not toward belief, but toward calculation. If the tree had burned, the beads should have remained buried beneath ash and roots, unless someone had retrieved them long before the fire, or unless the fire itself had been intentional. Kamau pulled archived environmental reports and found something curious. The lightning strike had been recorded during a clear weather anomaly. No storm system had passed over Ngong Hills that night. The incident had been dismissed as freak weather, but now it looked different. Purposeful, controlled destruction of evidence. Who benefits from destroying the tree? Amina asked quietly. Kamau's answer came without hesitation. Someone who needed the beads. He turned back to the board. The pattern was no longer mystical. It was operational. Retrieve the symbols, monitor financial betrayals, deliver the bead, trigger fear, and then somehow death followed. Whether psychological manipulation, chemical induction, or something more elaborate, Kamau did not yet know, but the oath had been weaponized, and the weapon was precise. They reached the charred remains of the Magumo at dusk. The trunk still stood, blackened and hollowed, its once wide branches now skeletal against a bruised sky. Wind moved low across the grass, carrying the scent of distant rain. Kamau walked slowly toward the tree's base, boots sinking slightly into softened earth. Even burned, the place felt guarded. He crouched and brushed aside layers of ash and soil where the beads had supposedly been buried. Amina joined him with gloves and a small excavation tool. It did not take long. Beneath compacted dirt lay a shallow depression, circular, deliberate, empty, no beads, no fragments, no remnants of wood. Whoever had taken them had done so carefully, without disturbing the surrounding soil more than necessary. Kamau stood and stepped back, scanning the landscape. From this vantage point, the skyline of Nairobi shimmered faintly in the distance, as though watching from afar. The contrast unsettled him. Ancient oath ground facing modern glass towers. As twilight deepened, headlights appeared on the dirt road below. A black SUV slowed but did not stop, its tinted windows concealing whoever sat inside. Kamau memorized the license plate before it disappeared toward the city. "We're not alone in this," Amina murmured. Kamau nodded. "We never were." He walked around the tree's perimeter and noticed something else, faint boot impressions leading away from the trunk toward a narrow path that curved behind the hill. The impressions were recent. No more than a day old. Someone had returned, not to retrieve beads, those were already gone, but perhaps to prepare something else. Kamau felt a tightening in his chest, not fear, but urgency layered with something darker. The killer wasn't simply honoring an oath, he was staging it, recreating sacred ground as theater, and the next act would not wait long. The break came unexpectedly. A man named David Mutaizo walked into Central Police Station just after midnight, soaked from rain and trembling visibly. He requested Detective Kamau by name. When Kamau entered the interrogation room, Mutaizo did not look dangerous. He looked exhausted, hollow-eyed. "I did it," he said before Kamau sat down. "The beads, the warnings, it was me." Kamau remained standing. "Explain." Mutaizo swallowed hard. He claimed to have been present during the original oath ceremony as a junior land clerk. He said he had witnessed the betrayal unfold over years, watched the council members enrich themselves while locals were displaced. According to him, he had dug up the beads before the lightning fire and decided to restore balance. "I never touched them," Mutaizo insisted when asked about the deaths. "I only returned what they buried." Kamau studied him carefully. "Returned how?" Mutaizo's eyes flickered. "I left the beads where they would find them. That was enough. Once they saw it, they knew." Knew what? Kamau wondered. That they were marked, that something ancient had been activated. But as the interrogation deepened, cracks formed. Mutaizo could not explain how he accessed Mwangi's locked apartment. He had no employment records connecting him to the gala where Warrior collapsed. Phone data placed him miles away during Karanya's death. His confession felt incomplete, desperate even. "You think fear can stop a man's heart?" Kamau asked quietly. Mutaizo met his gaze with unsettling calm. "If a man believes judgment has come, his body listens." The statement lingered long after he was escorted to holding. Kamau stepped outside into the corridor, rain hammering the station roof. Mutaizo might have delivered the beads. He might even believe he was part of something righteous. But he was not the architect. The orchestration ran deeper, through land registries, political offices, surveillance patterns. This was not the work of a lone believer. It was coordinated, strategic. And now, with Mutaizo in custody, the real architect would either accelerate or adapt. As thunder rolled once more across the distant outline of Ngong Hills, Kamau realized something chilling. The oath was no longer being enforced in secret. It was unfolding publicly, death by death, as if daring the city to decide which law truly ruled it. The forensic lab confirmed what Amina had suspected. The beads were carved from the burned Magumo tree near Ngong Hills, but not recently. Microscopic agging within the grooves suggested they had been carved years before the fire, which meant they were original, authentic, retrieved, preserved, and deployed deliberately. Kamau stared at the enlarged projection of the bead carvings displayed on the lab monitor. Under magnification, the shallow grooves revealed something more intricate than decorative markings. They were coded. Each bead bore a subtle variation in the spiral intersections, not random etchings but identifiers. "They're personalized," Amina said quietly. "Like signatures." Kamau nodded slowly. "Or judgments. If each oath taker had received a specific carving during the ceremony, then whoever retrieved the beads knew exactly which symbol belonged to which man. That required either presence during the oath or access to someone who had been. Mutaizo had claimed attendance, but Kamau sensed he was peripheral, a messenger at best, not the mind behind it. As the screen flickered with magnified lines and curves, Kamau felt a quiet unease creep into him. The beads were not threats, they were reminders, delivered only after betrayal was finalized. The deaths followed not immediately, but precisely timed, as though the men had been allowed to feel recognition before consequence. Later that evening, Kamau visited Mzee Baraka again. The old man sat outside his compound, watching dusk swallow the hills in layers of deepening blue. Without preamble, Kamau placed a photograph of the beads before him. The elder did not touch it, he only looked. "You have disturbed something that was sleeping," he said softly. Kamau's voice remained controlled. Who else attended the oath ceremony? Mzee Baraka hesitated longer than before. There was another, he admitted at last. A younger elder. Quiet, observant, he believed the land should never bend to politics. "Where is he now?" Kamau asked. The wind stirred dust between them. "He left after the fire," Baraka replied. Said the oath had been insulted. Kamau felt the pieces aligning with uncomfortable clarity. A man present at the ceremony, a man ideologically rigid, a man who vanished after the sacred tree burned under suspicious lightning. "Name," Kamau pressed. The elder's gaze hardened. "You are chasing a man who believes he serves justice, detective. Be careful not to make him certain you stand against it." As Kamau drove back toward the glittering skyline of Nairobi, the contrast felt heavier than ever. Glass towers reflected artificial light, but beneath them, soil remembered older promises. And somewhere between those two worlds walked a man who believed he had authority from both. The dreams returned with violence that night. Kamau found himself once again beneath the magumo tree, only now it was burning. Flames licked upward through branches while beads glowed like embers in the soil. Around him stood the oath takers, faces expressionless, eyes hollow. His father stood among them, not accusing, not forgiving, simply watching. "Which law do you serve?" His father's voice echoed without moving his lips. Kamau looked down and saw that his own hands were stained with ash and blood. He tried to speak, but the wind swallowed his voice. Then the beads began to rise from the ground, hovering midair, each one turning slowly until the carvings faced him. The spirals tightened, becoming eyes, watching, judging. He woke with a sharp inhale, heart pounding, sheets damp with sweat. The room was silent except for distant traffic moving through the sleepless arteries of Nairobi. For the first time since the investigation began, Kamau felt not analytical tension, but doubt. Not about the killer's existence, about his own position. By morning that doubt hardened into something more dangerous, empathy. He reopened Mutaizo's statement and re-examined every word. Restore balance, that phrase lingered. Kamau had spent his career enforcing laws written in parliamentary chambers, but he had grown up watching land disputes twist families into enemies, watching signatures override heritage. He understood, perhaps more than he admitted, how betrayal of land could feel like betrayal of blood. When Amina entered his office, she immediately sensed the shift. "You look different," she said. Kamau didn't deny it. "If someone believes the oath is higher than the Constitution," he said slowly, "then every death is not murder in his mind, it's correction." Amina folded her arms. "And in yours," Kamau held her gaze. Outside, thunder murmured faintly over Ngong Hills once more. "In mine," he replied quietly, "it's still homicide." But even as he said it, he knew the line separating those two interpretations was beginning to blur. The name Mzee Baraka had withheld did not stay buried for long. It surfaced through old church registries, abandoned land council minutes, and one faded photograph stored in county archives. Elijah Kioni, former junior elder, educated in theology before returning to Ngong to advocate for ethical guardianship of ancestral land. He had no criminal record, no known political affiliations. But after the magumo tree burned, Elijah vanished from public documentation. No voter activity. No registered address, as though he had dissolved into the hills themselves. Kamau stood over the projected image of Elijah's face in the operations room, calm eyes, narrow jaw, expression neither warm nor cold. "He doesn't look unstable," Amina murmured. Kamau shook his head. "Fanatics rarely do." Financial tracing revealed something more disturbing. Encrypted communications between Elijah and an anonymous donor network that had quietly funded legal challenges against development expansions around Ngong Hills. Not violence, litigation, strategic obstruction, until recently. The pattern suggested escalation from courtroom resistance to symbolic enforcement. Kamau leaned forward. "He isn't working alone," he said. "He has believers." The breakthrough came from surveillance triangulation near the burned Magumo site. Drone sweeps captured intermittent movement along the narrow ridge paths at night. Small groups, disciplined, always dispersing before dawn. Kamau assembled a quiet reconnaissance unit and drove toward the hills under cover of darkness. They parked kilometers away and proceeded on foot, boots crunching lightly against gravel. The air felt charged, not supernatural, but tense with anticipation. As they neared the charred tree, Kamau saw faint lantern light flickering beyond a rock outcrop. He signaled halt and advanced alone. From his vantage point he saw them, 4 figures standing in a semicircle around a shallow pit. In the center lay another carved bead. Elijah stood among them, voice low but steady. The oath was not revenge, he said. It was covenant. When covenant is broken, balance demands restoration. Kamau stepped forward into the lantern glow. Restoration doesn't come with autopsy reports, he said coldly. The figures froze. Elijah turned slowly, unsurprised. Detective, he said. You came. There was no panic in his voice, only recognition, as though this meeting had been inevitable. They arrested 2 of the men that night. Elijah did not resist. He walked beside Kamau down the ridge path without struggle, hands unbound until they reached the vehicles. You misunderstand what we are doing, Elijah said quietly as they descended. Then explain it, Kamau replied without looking at him. Elijah's tone remained measured. The men who died knew the oath bound them beyond paperwork. We did not poison them. We did not touch them. We returned their beads, a reminder of witness. Their own conscience completed the act. Kamau stopped walking. You expect me to believe guilt alone stopped 3 healthy hearts? Elijah met his gaze evenly. Belief shapes biology, detective. Fear alters rhythm. You saw their faces. Kamau said nothing because he had, and each face had indeed held recognition. Back at Central Station in Nairobi, interrogation stretched for hours. Elijah admitted retrieving the beads before the Magumo fire. He admitted organizing silent gatherings to prepare for consequence, but he denied direct physical harm. The oath is self-executing, he insisted. We simply awaken it. Then came the revelation that shifted everything. Amina burst into the interrogation room with a file. Another transfer just processed, she said urgently. The name hit like a stone dropped in still water. Governor Daniel Mwangi, the same official who had dismissed the deaths publicly. He had quietly approved a final land acquisition package that morning, land originally shielded by the oath. Kamau felt the room tighten. If Elijah's pattern held, the governor had just marked himself. Elijah observed Kamau's reaction closely. You see, he murmured, the soil keeps record. Kamau leaned forward, voice controlled but edged. If anything happens to him, you will answer for it. Elijah did not blink. If anything happens to him, detective, it will not be by our hands. The certainty in his tone unsettled Kamau more than denial would have. Security around the governor intensified immediately. Medical staff were placed on standby. Psychological evaluations were discreetly arranged. The media remained unaware of the land transfer. Kamau stationed himself personally at the governor's residence that evening, watching the man pace behind reinforced glass walls. The irony was suffocating, modern security systems defending against something that might not require entry. Elijah remained in custody, calm, almost contemplative. You cannot imprison belief, he had said before being escorted away. Kamau stood in the governor's study as dusk settled over the skyline of Nairobi. Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the outline of Ngong Hills. The governor wiped sweat from his brow repeatedly. It's nonsense, he muttered. Superstitious intimidation. Yet his pulse monitor, discreetly attached beneath his sleeve, told a different story, elevated, erratic. An hour passed, then another. The governor's breathing grew shallow. Get the doctor, Kamau ordered sharply as the man gripped his chest. Medical staff rushed in, administering stabilizers before full arrhythmia could take hold. The governor survived, barely. As paramedics wheeled him toward the ambulance, Kamau stepped back into the open veranda and stared toward the distant hills. The pattern had almost completed itself, but intervention had broken it, not through arrest, not through ritual. Through interruption of fear, Kamau exhaled slowly. If Elijah had been right about one thing, it was this: belief was the accelerant. Remove its inevitability and the body might resist collapse. Kamau returned to the station later that night and stood outside Elijah's holding cell. It ends, he said firmly. Elijah regarded him calmly. It already has, he replied. The oath was acknowledged again. Balance begins with recognition. Kamau walked away without responding. He had prevented another death, but not resolved the moral fracture underneath it. The oath had not vanished. It had merely been confronted. And as lightning flickered once more over Ngong Hills, Kamau knew the final reckoning would not be about arrest reports or political statements. It would be about what justice truly meant when law and land collided. The governor survived, but the illusion of immunity did not. News of his sudden medical emergency leaked within hours, and speculation spread across Nairobi like dry season fire. Talk shows debated curses versus stress. Investors whispered about instability. Religious leaders preached about repentance without naming names. And in holding, Elijah Kioni refused bail, refused counsel, refused media. The oath is not spectacle, he said quietly when Kamau visited him one last time. It was never meant for cameras. But Kamau understood something Elijah did not, or perhaps refused to admit. The deaths had never been supernatural inevitabilities. They had been engineered awakenings. Carefully timed reminders delivered to men already steeped in guilt and fear. The human heart is obedient to belief when belief is absolute. and the oath had been resurrected not by spirits but by strategy, by psychological precision, by exploiting conscience until it became lethal. Yet as Kamau drove toward Ngong Hills that evening, he knew arresting Elijah alone would not resolve what had been stirred. Something older than one man's conviction had surfaced. He climbed the ridge at dusk without backup this time. The charred magumo tree stood against a sky streaked with bruised violet and fading gold. Wind moved low across the grass. Kamau stopped at the hollowed trunk and placed the remaining recovered beads at its base. Evidence, symbols, witnesses to human weakness more than divine wrath. It ends here, he said aloud, not to spirits but to memory. For a long moment only wind answered him, then footsteps approached from behind, Mzee Baraka. The elder stood quietly beside him. You have chosen your law, the old man observed. Kamau nodded once. And you? Kamau asked. Baraka looked toward the distant skyline where Nairobi's lights flickered awake. The land does not demand death, he said softly. It demands respect. Kamau felt something inside him settle, not absolution, but clarity. The oath had never required blood. It had required accountability. And when that accountability was denied publicly, it had resurfaced privately in destructive form. He turned back toward the city. The final oath would not be sworn in soil tonight. It would be enforced through courts, investigations, exposure, not fear. Months later, the Ngong Ridge Development Project was suspended pending full land review. Financial crimes units uncovered coercive rezoning approvals and illegal proxy acquisitions tied to several political offices. Governor Muriithi resigned quietly under health concerns. Elijah Kioni faced charges not for murder, but for criminal intimidation, obstruction, and unlawful assembly. The autopsies remained officially inconclusive. The deaths would never be labeled homicide. Yet their impact was undeniable. A national conversation unfolded about land, legacy, and the quiet violence of displacement. Kamau testified before a parliamentary committee, not about curses but about fear weaponized. When people believe justice has failed them, he said calmly, they will attempt to create their own. The room had fallen silent, because everyone understood he was not only speaking about Ngong, he was speaking about the nation. On a quiet Sunday morning, Kamau returned alone to his father's small ancestral plot near Ngong Hills. The grass moved gently beneath a pale sky. He knelt and pressed his palm into the soil the way his father once had. For years he had rejected the old man's words as stubborn nostalgia. Now he understood them differently. Protect what feeds you, not through superstition, not through vengeance, but through vigilance, through law that does not forget where it stands. The skyline of Nairobi shimmered faintly in the distance, no longer looking like a lie, just a reminder of constant tension between progress and memory. Kamau exhaled slowly, feeling neither haunted nor triumphant. The earth remembered, but so did he. And as he rose to leave, he carried with him not the weight of an ancient curse, but the responsibility of ensuring justice would never need one again.
Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe for more.